Well, hello there. How's it going? Welcome to my little video series I call Crime Dive. My name is Crystal Sky, and if you're anything like me, you find yourself drawn to true crime cases. So that is what we're going to talk about. If you are also drawn to true crime and want to feel better about your own makeup skills at the same time, you should absolutely like, subscribe, and let's hang out together, usually every other Tuesday, where I will take a deep dive look into a true crime case while slapping on the old clown paint. Yes, how are you? Thank you again for putting up with a little bit of the chaos going on. But we are here. We are ready to discuss part 3. Oh my god, you guys are going to really enjoy part 3. So many, juicy things going on. It's incredible. The audacity of this little bitch is just incredible. We, of course, are discussing the Dana Ewell case. This is obviously part 3. I will go ahead and put the link to part 2 in the video description down below. And then in the video description for part 2, there is a link to part 1. Just in case you missed out. Also, wanted to give a shout out because this was a requested case. It was requested by, your original username was @HeyHeyYou, but I saw your comment. It's Catherine. So thank you so much, Catherine, for throwing this case my way. You threw the Bellevue murders my way. And then there's another case you threw my way that I am actively, I've got it in the arsenal ready to go. You know, there's a lot to that one. But this one, the Dana Ewell case, oh my gosh, I was so drawn to it. It's just amazing, guys. It's amazing. I'm sorry, but I don't think human beings should be wealthy. I just don't think we're evolved for it, you know? Yeah, I'll get to my thoughts at the very end, at the end of part 6. But for now, let's jump into part 3. As a reminder, I did read a book for this case. It's Catch Me If You Can by Craig Hanadell. Wasn't a huge fan of this book. Again, I will get into my critique, my review, and all that stuff at the very end of part 6. But yeah, that's where I got some of this information. Sorry, I was sitting here kind of fixing up my notes here. Alrighty, so let's dive in. Reminder, true crime, so this is going to be, pretty graphic content we're talking about. Mainly with this, moving forward, it's really about the language. There's a lot of foul language, and I try not to. I know I dropped a couple of C-bombs in the last video, but yeah, Dana is just such a little cunt that it's just hard for me not to say it. So yeah, just be forewarned. All right, let's get into part 3, guys, because there's so much to get into with this one. So much. Now, in part 2, if you'll remember, we ended with that Fresno Bee article. It's the local newspaper up in Fresno. Remember, the Fresno Bee ran that article on Sunday, November 1st. Pretty much outlining and pretty much stating that Dana was not ruled out as a suspect. Remember? We ended there. So let's pick up right for where we left off. So around the same time that this article drops on November 1st, and we are in November 1st, 1992. So as all this is happening, Fresno County Sheriff's Detective John Sousa, if you remember, is the lead detective on the case, discovered that after the Ewell's death, after Dale and Glee's death, the management of Dana's grandmother's estate. If you remember, Glee Mitchell, she was known as Big Glee. That was Glee's mother. Glee's mother was a trustee on her mother's estate, and Sousa found out that after the Ewell's death, that fell to Dana. So the estate's former administrator, Ruth Lind, talked to Sousa, and she informed Sousa that Dana had absolutely no interest in caring for his mother's estate or being a trustee of it. That is, until he found out the estate was worth $400,000. As soon as he found that out, he fired Lind and set himself up as the trustee of his grandmother's $400,000 estate. Now, all in all, it would be discovered that Dana would spend $160,000 of his grandmother's estate money on himself, living expenses and trips and all that stuff, while only spending about $93,000 on his grandmother's care. And get this, at some point, Dana made Monica the one in charge of Big Glee's healthcare decisions. I don't know what the official term for that be, but yeah, her healthcare decisions and all that were signed over to Monica Zent, if you'll remember, Dana Ewell's girlfriend, whose father was an FBI agent. So this was more interesting information, right, that Sousa was gathering. And around the same time, Sousa then got a call from Dana's defense attorney, Richard Berman. And he wanted to bring Dana down to the station so they could inventory some jewelry that the police still had in their custody, and they wanted to pick up Dale's .357 Ruger revolver. Remember, that had been left in the Ewell home after the police had released it, or excuse me, not released it, but like had swept through it and gathered evidence, and Dana had pointed out that his father's gun was still in his closet. Dana wanted to come pick that up. So on November 10th, Sousa then phoned up Berman and said, hey, bring your client on in. He can come do his inventory and all that stuff. So Berman and Dana did show up to the police station. However, when they showed up, Sousa informed them that they couldn't pick up the gun that day. They were going to have to wait for Detective Sergeant Dale Cottle. If you'll remember, he was the supervisor of the Fresno County detectives. And Sousa was like, oh, hey, you know what? He's actually not in the office, so you're going to have to come back tomorrow to pick up the gun. In actuality, Sergeant Cottle was actually just hiding in the captain's office. So this was all a little ruse that Sousa had come up with. So he figured Dana was super cheap and whatnot, and he wouldn't want to pay Berman to come with him a second day. So that's what Sousa really wanted, was to try to get Dana one-on-one. However, Sousa told them that they could still inventory the jewelry, so he took them back into a room where they had like dozens and dozens of envelopes on the table, right? And it all had like evidence and stuff like that they had collected. And of course, some of these envelopes had the jewelry that they wanted to inventory. Now, Sousa knew exactly which envelopes had the jewelry that they wanted to look at were in. But again, wanting to just like really fuck with Dana, really get him sort of like off his game, right? He wants Dana to slip up. Sousa decides to he was going through each envelope individually, purposely not going to the jewelry ones just yet, just taking his time and making sure that Dana saw what was inside each envelope that he was opening. And again, he was purposely taking his time, just kind of humming along. Berman was like kind of content too. I mean, come on, like homeboy's getting paid by the hour, right? Like what the fuck would he care if Sousa's taking his sweet time, right? But Dana was clearly very restless and really wanted to get out of there. It was very, very obvious. Dana finally turned to his attorney and said, quote, is there any way to move this along? I have things to do today. Yes, Dana, you're the only one with things to do. It is Dana's world, and we're just NPCs in it, y'all. This kid, I fucking hate this kid so much. But Sousa, reminded them like, hey man, I'm just like following chain of evidence procedure. I'm following everything to a T. However, Sousa then produced a document that the DA had drawn up, and he said, quote, Mr. Berman, if you'll sign this, which as you can see waives the chain of evidence procedures, I can just hand the whole batch over to you in about 2 minutes. Berman then asked Dana to leave the room. And once his client had left the room, Berman then rounded on Sousa, and I was like, dude, like, are you fucking for real? Like, what the hell is this? Like, what bullshit is this? Like, we're not signing this. Is this a joke? Now, Sousa went on to try to paint it as if they were, like, concerned for Dana's safety. And he told him, quote, Richard, I'm very concerned, and I know you look out for your client's welfare. This Joel Radisvich kid, he's spooky. Dana could very well be in danger from Joel. Berman did not take the bait. However, Dana did take the other bait, and the next day he showed up again to the Fresno police station without his attorney. Sousa, along with his partner, Fresno County Sheriff's Detective Ernie Burke, took Dana to the back to sign, I don't know, some sort of like evidence release form or something that Dana had to sign so he could get his father's gun. And as they're back there, Burke then asked Dana, like, hey, were there any other items that turned up missing from your home? And Dana was like, oh yeah, as a matter of fact, yeah, a bunch of jewelry has gone missing. He claimed there was a pearl necklace worth $4,500 that was missing, a pearl and bead necklace worth $4,500, a pearl bracelet worth an unknown amount, a diamond bracelet that was valued at $2,500, and a woman's emerald and diamond ring that was valued at $3,000. Or excuse me, $4,000. And Dana claimed all this jewelry had gone missing. And, Sousa and Burke was like, all right, well, we'll get on that. We'll file a report and we'll keep an eye on that. And then Sousa asked Dana, quote, while you're here, do you know anything about your dad being a witness in a federal drug case last year? Now, apparently this case was like nothing major at all. I don't know, had to do with some plane that Dale had rented to a customer or something. I don't think it had anything to do with that earlier case we talked about in part 1. But yeah, it wasn't anything major. They weren't really looking at this as like any type of connection to the murders, but Sousa just wanted to get Dana talking. Dana said he did hear that his dad was supposed to go to Sacramento and to testify against someone named Nick Latancio. And Joel said that Michael D. Dowling, if you will remember, is the attorney who handled the Ewell's estate and inheritance and like all that stuff after the Ewell's deaths. Dana said Dowling had told him all this. That's how he knew about it. Sousa and Burke then shifted their conversation to Joel. And they told Dana that they were a little concerned about this Joel Radisfitch kid that they had discovered. And like, yeah, could Dana tell them anything about him? And apparently Dana, like, his demeanor and like his body posture and whatnot just like immediately stiffened. And he like, again, bro, like, take some acting classes or, like, learn about a poker face or something, right? But, like, yeah, it was so obvious that they completely caught him off guard by mentioning Joel's name. And Dana just quickly was like, well, I'm out of here. I got what I want. And he, like, quickly, like, dashed out of the police headquarters and, like, peeled out of the parking lot in his Mercedes. So later, that same month of November, Sousa got a call. It was from a man named Edwin Hewitt. He said he was the boyfriend of one of the Ewell's neighbors. This neighbor was Carol Badley, and apparently this was also one of the neighbors that Dana had called trying to find out if they had seen his parents when he was like saying that they were missing or whatever. Now, Edwin had actually been interviewed the day the bodies were discovered, and he said he didn't like hear or see anything unusual. However, with the story getting lots and lots of press, you know, all these many months later, Edwin was now calling up Sousa to say, you know what, I actually did hear something strange that night. He said he heard something strange that Easter Sunday morning around 2 or 3 a.m. Quote, it sounded like somebody loading something in the bed of a truck. He was drinking. He had drunk about 4 to 5 glasses of vodka, and he's waiting for Carol to return home. She was working at a Moose Club party, and she was supposed to call Edwin when she got off. And when she hadn't called him by midnight, Edwin then just drove over to her house to wait for her and, you know, was just like drinking in her living room, waiting for her to call him. So as he was waiting, you know, and drinking, he looks over out the window and he notices, oh, that's weird. The Ewell's dusk to dawn light that's usually on over the garage, it's not on. Carol's house was right next door to the Ewell's. So he thought that was weird because it was always on. And it was as he was noticing this is when he heard the strange noise. He walked over to the window. He saw that the shed door was open in the Ewell's yard, and he claimed that he then overheard 2 men whispering. One of them, he said, was a bossy guy with an overpowering voice, while the second guy had a mild and soft voice. Quote, they were completely different. One was like telling the other what to do. Now, right, you can guess, right? Like how this sounds, right? Like Edwin is now basically changing his entire story here, right? Not to mention he'd been drinking on top of that, right? But despite all that, Sousa couldn't help but be like pretty intrigued with what Edwin said that he saw, or overheard rather. And he was wondering, like, dude, did like Dana let Joel in the night before the murders? And Edwin piqued Sousa's interest more when he said that shortly after the murders and Dana had moved back in, him and Carol were working in her front yard, and they were headed towards the back when they looked over and they saw 2 men standing on the Ewell's porch. I believe it was in their backyard maybe, or maybe their side yard. He said one of the men was jumping up and down on the ledge, and both of them were like super, super excited and stoked about something. Both of them were like laughing and obviously in a good mood. Quote, I looked across the fence and they saw us and went right back in the house. He would end up identifying the other man as Joel. On November 25th, Monica's father, FBI agent John Zent, wrote a little op-ed to the Fresno Bee. And in this like scathing, letter or whatever announcement that he had said, he proclaimed Dana's innocence, was critical of the Fresno County sheriff's detectives, was saying that they were harassing Dana and all that stuff. And I'm gonna read you his little op-ed. Of course I am, because like, dudes, as we will get into this case, I'm just like, bro, man, like this is out there for the world to see forever, permanently. Like, you publicly put this out there. So His little op-ed was titled, "Letting Suspicion Linger on Dana Ewell is Cruel." And let's read it, shall we? In response to your article concerning Dana Ewell, November 1st, detectives still digging in Ewell slayings case, my family believes that both the Fresno Bee and the sheriff's office have, without validity, tried to link Dana with the death of his family. It is well known to the sheriff's office that Dana was with our daughter having dinner in our Morgan Hill home when this crime occurred. Evidence, along with witness statements, including my own, fully support Dana's whereabouts. The concept that Dana hired someone to do this crime is really grasping for straws. Perhaps it isn't apparent, but Dana is a victim. He has lost in one crime all of his immediate family. During that Easter weekend on Saturday, my family spent a long and enjoyable dinner with Dale, Glee, Tiffany, and Dana at their Pajaro Beach home. The Ewells took great pride in Dana's accomplishments at Santa Clara University and in his relationship with our daughter, Monica, also a SCU student. We stayed late into the evening taking a walk on the beach, two families enjoying their children's happiness. Dana's love for his family, his respect for his parents was mirrored in their love for him, that pride parents have in realizing their kids are doing well. I've been in federal law enforcement working complex criminal investigations for over 21 years. In my opinion, there have been a number of improper procedures coupled with a lack of professionalism and objectivity within this case. On that Tuesday, April 21st, when Dana's family was found, early in the morning, I had called the sheriff's office to request they check the family residence after Dana had received a guarded response from a neighbor he had called for that same purpose. Realizing there might be a problem at Fresno, I, not the sheriff's office, had Dana and Monica flown with me to Fresno. For that week or more, we stayed with Dana while he, along with his surviving relatives, made arrangements for his family. During that week, Dana made time and was available frequently to the sheriff's office to answer any questions and provide any assistance requested by them. Some have taken note that Dana has a nice car and clothes and goes to an expensive college. Having spoken with Dale and Glee, I know they were very happily providing the best for both Dale and Tiffany, which obviously that was a typo on his part, right? The fact that the Ewells had significant financial resources simply made it easier for them to give the best to their children. That is an action any parent would do if money wasn't the issue. Without question, Dana has suffered a great loss compounded by those who would link him to this crime without any factual basis. Eventually, someone will be caught who will explain the events surrounding this sad crime, usually after getting off the hook for some other crime. Until then, idle speculation or unfounded implications should be avoided by all. Put yourself in Dana's shoes. He would gladly forego all the money to simply again be with his family. Our family supports and loves Dana as part of our own. Before this crime and since, he has been a very welcome guest in our home. The harm that has been done to him within Fresno and at Santa Clara University will pass, but none of it has been beneficial to solving this crime. The challenge is to resolve every aspect of the crime and identify the perpetrator, not to simply take aim at Dana in light of one's own limitations or inabilities. John Zent, Morgan Hill. Yeah, shots fired. And apparently, Sousa and Burke were especially incensed at that last line about one's limitations, because they were like, oh, that's obviously directed, at us. And yeah, it just keep Agent Zent's little op-ed in mind, all right? Keep it at the forefront of your mind as we get more and more into this case, because, I couldn't stop thinking about it as I kept uncovering more and more, and I'm like, bro. So funny. Not in a ha-ha way, but just sort of like a, I can't believe it type of way, Sousa and Burke were already pissed at Agent Zent because they heard that Zent was making fun of them along with Dana, and that him and Dana were calling them Bert and Ernie. Sousa and Burke were also mad because they thought maybe John Zent was helping Dana derail the investigation. So around Christmas time, December, Sousa got another call from a man named Harry Manoogian. I hope I said that right. And he owned the Avenue of Flowers flower shop. It was a florist on Kings Canyon Road, and he was calling Sousa to inform him of some pretty interesting information that he had. So he said not long after the murders, he had called the Ewell home, and a young man proclaiming to be a friend of Dana's had answered. Harry needed to send an FTD sympathy offering of either flowers or plants to the Ewell home, and he was calling to ask what Dana would prefer. The man on the phone said plants would be fine, and Harry said that on June 6th, he delivered said plants to the Ewell home. And who answered the door? none other than the young man that was on the phone with him. The plant had a card that read, quote, "Dear Tiffany, we're always with you." And they were from some friends of hers in Japan. Sousa asked Harry, well, do you happen to remember this man's name? And Harry said, quote, "Sure, that's why I'm phoning. I saw his name in the Bee a few weeks ago, Joel Radisvich." Harry would end up handing over the delivery receipt to Sousa, and the initials JR were scribbled at the bottom. Around this same time, the producers of Unsolved Mysteries contacted the Fresno Sheriff's Office, wanting to know, like, hey, should we maybe do a story on this case? Maybe it'll help generate new leads or something. However, Unsolved Mysteries would never, ever do a segment on the Ewell case because the executive producers could not get Dana's cooperation or to sign off on it, and they were insistent on not doing the story unless they had Dana's cooperation and consent. So let's now go to the next year, all right, February of 1993. All that time, right, through December of 92 and January of 93, once again, right, Joel was dodging the police, couldn't get a hold of him or anything. So, on February 1st, 1993, 15 vehicles along with 15 detectives, mostly from NET, if you remember, that was the narcotics enforcement team, and they were the team that were primarily sort of surveilling Joel and Dana and their movements, all drove to Canoga Park in Los Angeles. And this was so that they could corner Joel. They were all in, like, undercover vehicles, so, like, nondescript, like, you know, pickup trucks, cars, and whatnot, and they were all dressed in civilian clothes. So half of the team were sent to the Canoga Park DMV to wait for Joel, and the other half of the team was sent to Joel's mother's home, Judy Radisvich. Now, this was all part of, like, this huge, elaborate setup, all right, that Sousa had set up. So Sousa had continued to request and continued to receive surveillance on Joel in Southern California and his movements. And Sousa had also flagged his registration, his car's registration. Additionally, he had also written to the DMV requesting their assistance in trying to get their sights on Joel. And they, of course, you know, agreed to help police. Joel's registration was actually due for renewal that month of February. So a DMV officer then phoned up Judy and informed her that there was some sort of problem with Joel's registration. Someone had duplicated it, and that Joel needed to come down to the DMV and straighten it all out. Specifically, they needed Joel to come in on Monday, February 1st. Later, Judy called the DMV back and said, well, you know what? I'm going to bring my son's car in. I'll take care of it for him. Now, at this point, right, when they found that out, Sousa, like, had to wonder, like, okay, is this even worth doing the operation anymore? But they went ahead and proceeded anyway, because the thought process was like, okay, even if Judy shows up to the DMV, at some point in time, Joel is going to get behind the wheel of his own vehicle, you know? So the operation was still a go. The team drove down the day before, January 31st, and at daybreak on February 1st, the team descended to their respective posts, and at daybreak on February 1st, the surveillance team at the DMV were pleasantly surprised to see Joel roll up in his black Honda CRX. Joel was in and out of the DMV relatively quickly, and as he left, the team followed him, with Sousa's vehicle being in the very back so that he could sort of, like, coordinate the team, and so Joel didn't, you know, mistakenly see him or something. Sousa also told the surveillance team that it was way better to lose Joel in the surveillance than for them to be spotted, you know? So, like, if there was a chance they're going to be spotted, it was better just to let Joel go. So after leaving the Canoga Park DMV, Joel just sort of cruised around, kind of seeming like almost in kind of like a meandering sort of way. He hit up quite a few convenience stores, fast food places, and yeah, it just seemed that he was just sort of like cruising, didn't really have like any set goal or destination in mind, you know? Joel then stopped by his mother's house and then proceeded to drive all around the LA area. And as he was driving all around the LA area, he stopped at multiple payphones and made several phone calls. Now, this was very odd to the detectives because they were like, wait, like his mom has a perfectly fine phone at the home. Like, why is he stopping at all these payphones? That's weird. Joel drove to payphones in Canoga Park, El Segundo, and Seal Beach, covering quite a few miles in a relatively short period of time, because I believe we mentioned this in part 2, Joel drove around like the entitled prick that he is, like always going over the speed limit, always running like fresh red lights and stuff like that. Like he was just an asshole. Now, as Joel stopped at one of these payphones as they're following him around. Sousa was like, man, like, we have to know, what is he saying in these conversations? Who's he talking to? What's being discussed? But unless they were gonna like put like, you know, a fucking boom or shotgun mic in there, right? Like that was gonna be like pretty much impossible. But that's when Detective Sergeant Jeff Hollis suggested like, hey, why don't we just eavesdrop on him? Quote, just that, next payphone he stops at, park around the block and walk up and use the phone next to him. Now, Sousa, like, it couldn't believe Joel would be stupid enough to say anything, like, incriminating or anything if someone was standing by him, but, like, I mean, what else were they gonna do, right? It was like, all right, I guess it was worth a shot. And so they continued following Joel around, and it was well into the evening on February 1st before police got their first chance to eavesdrop. Detective Rick Purcell was the one who would eavesdrop on Joel, and Sousa monitored the whole thing through binoculars a bit away, and he could tell with Joel's like body movements and stuff that he was very excited. He's very animated, possibly in like a really good mood. And Joel seemed to just like not even pay attention to Purcell, who was now next to the payphone right next to Joel. Didn't seem to give him any thought at all. Purcell heard Joel say, quote, just play the game. I think it's going well. And after about 10 minutes, Joel hung up the phone and went into the 7-Eleven. Yeah, I forgot to mention this was a payphone in front of the 7-Eleven. Now, as Joel went into the 7-Eleven, Purcell radioed Sousa to inform him, you know, what he heard. And one of the things he had heard was Joel talking about the weather. And like Sousa was like, are you serious? But Purcell said, quote, hang on, the weather over the grapevine on the way here from Fresno sounded like he was saying the road was clear and whatnot. He said, come on down, you ought to be here. Then he says, I don't know, a helicopter, you know, like he's telling someone to take a chopper down. So it went on like that for a while. And Joel was getting back into his car at this point, so like Purcell had to hurry and finish his thoughts to Sousa. Starting up now, oh, no shit, he said, bring your parents and your sister. We'll have a party at your house. Joel was then followed to a rundown apartment building in Huntington Beach. And that is when the team terminated their surveillance on Joel for the day. So back at their hotel/home base, the team all discussed what they had witnessed and observed and what Purcell had overheard. Now, it was very clear, right? It was like super obvious that like Joel's behavior and demeanor, you know, making all these weird calls from payphones and stuff, like, was obviously shady as fuck, right? They also noticed that the way Joel, remember, was sort of driving, meandering around, it was almost in sort of like a counter-surveillance type of way. And he had driven that way for about 20 minutes before Purcell had gotten the chance to eavesdrop. And the cherry on top for all of them, right, was that really, really sickening comment about bringing your parents and sister and we'd all have a party. And at this point, right, they were pretty certain that Dana was the one Joel was talking to, but they couldn't prove it. But they at least found out where Joel was currently staying, and so they decided to set up surveillance on him for a couple days and sort of get his routine, see what this kid did on a day-to-day basis. So they noticed, after surveilling him for a few days, that Joel would usually leave his apartment around 11 a.m. or noon, and then he'd spend much of the day just like driving around aimlessly. He would eat at Taco Bell a lot, that was his favorite fast food joint, and he visited the Long Beach Aviation Center, the airport, and police had no idea why he would be visiting there. And as usual, Joel also stopped at random payphones to place calls. And apparently it was kind of difficult for the team to keep up with Joel. We just said, right, he drove like an asshole. And so the team was also having to drive like dickheads to keep up with him. On top of that, they were navigating foreign roads. You know, a lot of this team were from Fresno, you know, towards NorCal. So they were also having to navigate, you know, these foreign roads. And they finally terminated their surveillance on Joel for the moment on February 3rd. And the team headed back to Fresno. Now, they regrouped, and Sousa was trying to decide, okay, what should our next mode of attack be? And he thought, well, we know where Joel is staying. Maybe I can get like the apartment manager or something to help us out, you know? So he drove back down to SoCal to Huntington Beach. The apartment manager was an older woman named Helen, and yeah, she was more than happy to help Sousa out. And Sousa had asked her what Joel's status was in the building, and Helen told him, quote, easy, he's renting a room from a tricker. The guy's name is Rick. Joel moved in the end of January. I'll tell Rick his roommate will have to fill out a rental form if he wants to stay here. And it was after Sousa got back from this trip, when he got back to Fresno, that Detective Burke told him what he had found out about Tom Duong. Remember, we talked about that over in part 2? I think it had taken quite a while to kind of like track Tom down and all that. So yeah, when Sousa got back from this trip from Huntington Beach, that's when Burke told him all about the information he had learned from Tom. And it would end up being that this information from Tom would end up being like one of the first huge breaks in the case. So after learning about all of that, about, you know, all the movements they'd seen Joel doing, the magazines and the manuals and all that stuff that he had sent to Tom's home, Sousa was like all but convinced that Joel was the shooter and that Dana had hired him to take out his family. And by this point, they knew that they were going to have to keep an extra close eye on Joel and really keep an eye on his movements. And fortunately, due to the other successes they had already had with the surveillance they had done, Sousa was able to get like county resources and county funds to help with the surveillance. So with that, the surveillance on Joel continued. And as the surveillance on Joel continued, Sousa would frequently travel between Fresno and LA to keep, you know, kind of keep up to date with the team, what was going on and all that stuff. And as they were following Joel, again, which was kind of hard because he drove like a dick, the team were all just like, dude, how is this little prick not being pulled over? Like constantly going 20 over the speed limit, constantly running fresh red lights and whatnot, running stop signs, just being a total dickwad. Although what is funny is one of the teams that was following Joel did end up getting pulled over because I think they like were speeding or something, trying to catch up to Joel. So that was pretty funny. They also noticed that in addition to going to all like the payphones and placing calls, Joel also frequented the Long Beach Aviation Center, the airport. And eventually, the team started to wonder if maybe Joel wasn't taking some sort of flying lessons there. And then, on March 18th, 1993, Sousa received an inter-office memo. It was from Gary Hoff, the Fresno County Senior Deputy District Attorney. And the memo read, quote, "The District Attorney's Office received the enclosed note in the attached letter. The anonymous sender obviously finds the part highlighted, done by the sender, suspicious. Mr. Hunt asked me to pass this along to you for your consideration." A post-it note was then stuck to the attached letter, and it read, quote, "I hope you are investigating him. Isn't this an interesting statement considering the situation?" And so then Sousa looked at the letter. It had the imprint of Western Piper Sales on it, Dale's company, remember? And it looked to be sort of like part of like some sort of like mass mailing marketing campaign. And the flyer was addressed to Dear Aircraft Owner. Now, the first line, which was the line that was highlighted, read, quote, "My name is Dana J. Ewell, and I own Western Piper Sales in Fresno." The letter went on to boast of Western Piper's success and its highest level of service and professionalism available today. And it closed with an invitation to aircraft owners to contact Jack Whitman in service or Bob Purcell in sales. And it was signed Dana J. Ewell. Now, after this, Sousa was like, you know what? I'm going to turn up the heat. And it was in the hopes that Joel would slip up. By this point in time, the police figured that out of the two, Joel was the weaker link. So he was the one that they were going to try to break. So to that end, Sousa did an interview with the Los Angeles Times, the LA Times, and his interview and story with them was published on March 22nd. Now, in this article, which I did read, pretty much spelled out everything we've gone over, like about how like Dana was a suspect, and this was after they had ruled out all those other, you know, possibilities with Dale's business, Glee's CIA ties, or anything like that. And in this article, Joel's name was also dropped yet again. And in this article, it also implied that Joel was dodging Fresno authorities. So not long after this article comes out on March 27th, a detective surveilling Joel, it was Purcell again, followed him in a pickup truck as Joel left in his Civic from his Huntington Beach apartment, and he left at 10:39 a.m. He stopped by an El Pollo Loco and then gassed up his car. And after that, he drove to the UCLA campus. After stopping by the guard station to ask for directions, he proceeded into the lot. And it was at this point that Purcell would lose sight of Joel. But one detective, John Avila, was able to continue following Joel on foot. And he saw that Joel went into the UCLA library. Inside, Avila overheard Joel asking the receptionist, librarian, whatever, where copies of the LA Times could be found. Joel then returned to his car at 2 p.m. and was continued to be followed by Avila. And Joel drove along Sunset Boulevard, heading towards Malibu. He drove to an apartment in Topanga Canyon, but nobody was home when he knocked. And in his report, Avila went on to describe what he observed Joel doing after this. On Saturday, March 27th, 1993, at approximately 14:31 hours, I was involved in a moving surveillance involving the subject who was driving a black Honda CRX in the area of Pacific Coast Highway and Coastline Drive, Topanga Canyon. At approximately 14:34 hours, I observed subject Radisvich walking across the Pacific Coast Highway toward the ocean. As I watched through the binoculars, I saw him walk to the edge of a cliff located near the intersection cited above. Radisvich walked toward a vehicle that was parked there. His head was bowed, and he seemed to be very upset. He kept looking down toward the ground, and then would look over the cliff as if contemplating jumping. He squatted down and appeared to be looking out over the ocean. He was not talking to anyone in the area. He just seemed to be very self-confined, and at one point, I felt he may jump over the cliffs onto the rocks below. He appeared very, very upset, and it was my personal feeling that he may be contemplating suicide. At 14:45 hours, I observed Radisvich walk back across PCH into a residential area and out of my view. During the course of my observation of Radisvich, at the time he was near the cliff, I felt he was in a very lonely state. It would not have taken much for him to jump off the cliff and into the rocks. And there was another member of the surveillance team that sort of echoed these same sentiments in their own report. And when Sousa learned this, he wondered if maybe the LA Times article hadn't started Joel on a spiral, on a downward spiral, right? Which is what Sousa wanted, right? Because when, he's spiraling, he's going to make mistakes, and then they could catch him. Joel ended up gazing out over the cliffs for about 5 or 10 minutes, and then he drove once again to the aviation complex where he made several phone calls on the payphone. Now, going back to Fresno, nearly every week since the murders, at least one of Dale's brothers, if you remember, we have Ben, Dan, and Richard, would call Sousa, wanting updates, trying to maybe offer leads or information or something, just really wanting to know. And we already discussed this briefly in part 2, but Dana, not once did he call Sousa about the status of the investigation or anything like that. He never called, never cared. One morning, Richard phoned up Sousa and saying that they wanted to double the reward money to $100,000 and just wanted to make sure it wouldn't impede the investigation in any way, which it wouldn't. And he also made a point to tell Sousa that Dana did not want to contribute a cent to double the reward. So in very late March, when, the LA Times article dropped and Joel is seemingly starting to spiral and all that, Sousa got another call. It was from a man named Russell Georgeson. Now, he handled the Mitchell family trust account. If you remember, the Mitchell family, that was Glee's family. Glee Mitchell, that was her maiden name. So this Georgeson guy, he handled the Mitchell estate. And this estate had been set up for Glee by her mother, Big Glee. Now, since Glee's death, Georgeson had been using Dan Ewell, Dale's brother, as trustee of the estate and not Dana. And this apparently really pissed Dana off because he sent Georgeson a letter. And this letter is what prompted Georgeson to contact Sousa. And I'm going to read you that letter, of course. So let's go ahead and read what little Dana said to Georgeson here. Dear Mr. Georgeson, I would appreciate if you could tell me in what century you and Dan Ewell plan to wrap up the James J. Mitchell Trust. Being only 22 years of age, I would like to do some early estate planning and want to know how much money will be squandered away in attorney's fees. Right now, you're wasting my time, my money, my attorney's time, your time, Dan Ewell's time, etc., etc., etc. Please give me your intentions. As you know, a trustee is accountable to a degree of fiscal responsibility. Technically, Dan Ewell is opening himself up to personal damages by continuing in this manner. Does your client realize that, Mr. Georgeson? Do I have to file a complaint against you to get some action? Please do something in this century. Dana J. Ewell. Yeah, that's the only time you can get any type of reaction from Dana is when it involves money. So on March 31st at around 10:40 a.m., Sousa and the team were outside of Joel's apartment building, and they were watching him pack things up in his car. He was moving. Helen had contacted Sousa and let him know Joel's move-out date. At 11:20 a.m., Joel was done, and Detective Robert Bob Moore was the one who was monitoring him. And when Joel was about to leave, he reported to the team, quote, "Okay, looks like he's done here. He's in his vehicle and away. Let's get ready. Wait a minute, he pulled up, getting out near a dumpster. Okay, yeah, he tossed a trash bag into the dumpster." They quickly scooped up the bag, tossed it into the trunk, and continued following Joel. And Joel went to John's hamburger stand. From there, he went to the Long Beach Aviation Center, then went north on the 405 freeway. And he drove to an office complex on Sunset Boulevard. It was a lawyer's office. At around 3 p.m., Joel then went to his mom's house where he unloaded his car, and then he stayed there until about 9:30 that night. And at 9:30, he left his mom's house and went to the 7-Eleven and used the payphone that they had tagged him at before. And as he was using one of the payphones, like the way that he was like looking down and then dialing and looking down and dialing made them wonder if Joel had another pager. Joel hung around the 7-Eleven for about an hour, put gas in his car, and then headed back to his mom's. The team ended their surveillance that day and then headed back to the hotel/home base. And once they were there, they went through the trash that Joel had thrown away. They found dozens and dozens of Taco Bell wrappers. Detective Moore pulled out a handful of notes and commented, quote, "Female handwriting, notes to Joel. Looks like Joel's roommate has a girlfriend and she wants to play a little bouncy bouncy with Radisfitch." There were other innocuous things, water bottles, other trash, food and whatnot, But then Detective Moore uncovered a copy of The Recycler. And this was a regional free classified advertising paper. So they opened it up looking through it, and they saw just below the roommate's wanted section, there was a display ad, right? It's about 5 inches square, and it was going on about the effectiveness of the recycler and all that stuff, right? And the ad contained a sort of 1950s-esque, picturesque family reading the recycler. There was a mom, dad, son, and daughter. And scribbled in ink near that ad, near the border, was written, "Unfurnished util, sec dep, $400, phone, how am I living, occupation." Obviously some sort of shorthand notes that Joel had written down. Additionally, though, what really caught detectives' attention was how Joel had doctored and altered this ad. He gave the father this long serpent's tongue licking the daughter's face and wrote "slurp slurp" next to it. And then he drew a speech bubble near the dad that said, quote, "Nice beef, honey." And the daughter's speech bubble read, "Dad, you suck." The son's speech bubble read, "Mom farted." But it was what Joel had done to the mother in the ad that really made detectives sort of pause and really look at it. So Joel had drawn eyeglasses on her. And to Sousa, it kind of reminded him of Glee because she had her glasses on when she was found. And Joel had drawn a hideous smile on her. And he had drawn a mushroom cloud-like explosion coming out from the back of her head. And he had written the word "pow" right next to it. So as the investigation progressed, as the surveillance on Joel progressed, and he kept going to the aviation center, Sousa was all but convinced that he was taking some sort of flying lessons. And what he really wanted to do was talk to Joel's flight instructor. And he did manage to find out that Joel was taking flight lessons, and he did manage to track down Joel's flight instructor. His name was Fabrice Alouche. I hope that's how you say his name. And he told Sousa that yes, Joel was taking lessons with him. He was taking helicopter lessons. Quote, "Let me see. I believe he got his private chopper license up in Fresno around September of last year. But around the beginning of this year, he left Mazzy, that's Mazzy Flying Service in Fresno, up there and started with me when I was at CSR Aviation. Well, then I came here to Everything Flyable in May, and Joel stuck with me." Now, Sousa thought that this timing that Fabrice had mentioned was quite interesting, because Joel had switched from Fresno to SoCal right as that Fresno Bee article came out that named him publicly for the first time. His last lesson with Mazzy Flying Service in Fresno was November 8th, 1992. So before Fabrice, Joel was taking lessons with Jim Brannon, and he was the president of the Mazzy Flying Service in Fresno. And before he left, Fabrice also did tell Sousa that Joel was going for his commercial license, and that the cost of these lessons that he gave Joel were $500 an hour. He said Joel had probably spent about $7,000 to $8,000 on lessons thus far, and he always paid in cash. He also added that Joel probably had about $5,000 worth of lessons left to complete before he could get his commercial license, Fabrice was also able to give Sousa the only contact information he had for Joel, and that was Joel's pager number. Sousa thanked him for his time and just begged him, please don't tell Joel you talked to me. But Fabrice said, quote, well, Joel's pleasant enough, but if he's involved in murder, he'll get no sympathy from me. Sousa's next call was to the Mazzy Flying Service in Fresno. He spoke to Jim, who, as we said, right, was the president and owner and operator of the Mazzy Flying Service. And he said of Joel, quote, there was something interesting about Joel. He wore a baseball hat all the time, even when he was indoors. He never took it off. I used to kid him, why don't you take that thing off? He just laughed. Jim said Joel would always pay in cash or a money order, and that another young man named Dana Ewell had come in with Joel initially. And this was in June of 1992. He said when Dana had come in with Joel, he negotiated a cut rate deal for both of them. And he had done this by offering to prepay for these flight lessons. And so he was asking Jim, what can you do for me if I prepay for all these lessons now? Jim said, quote, he said, what's the best we can do if he paid in advance? Jim said that he cut his minimum rate of $6,110 to $5,660. Quote, he said he had a good friend he was living with that summer. I believe he said he was a college roommate that also was interested in lessons. I offered him the same discount. Joel then enrolled in the basic helicopters course. Mazzy then faxed over the copies of the 2 money orders that they had received. They each totaled $5,660. They had both been received from Joel. And if you'll remember, $5,660 was the exact amount that had been taken out of Big Glee's trust account. Jim added that Joel had also inquired about getting his instrument rating and his commercial rating after he acquired his basic licensing. All in all, about $20,000 worth of licensing and lessons and all that. Additionally, Jim, who just so happened to be an FAA examiner, that's the Federal Aviation Administrator, and Jim was an examiner for them. And so he did some further digging into Joel's recorded flight hours. And so I guess real quick, what an FAA examiner does is they pretty much approve and examine holders of airman medical certificates, which essentially seem to be basically it states that you meet all of the physical health requirements needed to maintain your pilot's license. So, Jim knows his stuff, right? So anyway, Jim's digging through all of the recorded flight hours that Joel had logged, and he discovered about 100 missing hours of flight time. There was 34 hours of helicopter time, 44 hours of airplane flight time, and 23 hours of simulator instruction that were all unaccounted for. This was about approximately $12,000 worth of instruction and lessons that were sort of unaccounted for. And according to those records, Joel's total flight time was 260 hours. Now, when Jim contacted Sousa and informed him of all this, he said, I think that these missing hours were, done at other flight instruction schools that you guys haven't uncovered yet. He thought this because though it is possible to fake your flight time hours, the fraud in the pilot's log, known as P51 time, is pretty easy to spot. And I was doing a little bit further research on this on Reddit. And yeah, there were some people on Reddit saying that, so if you have someone who in actuality has only flown 200 hours, but they're claiming they flew 1,000 hours, that's pretty obvious that they're full of shit. But if someone say they flew 3,000 hours, when in actuality they only flew 2,000, that kind of fraud was harder to spot. Sousa then spoke with Lori Bennywise, who was the one who had actually given the lessons to Dana and Joel. She said on her very first lesson with Dana, he did mention that he had a friend who was also interested in taking lessons, and he gave her Joel's number so that she could contact him. She said Joel was a very enthusiastic student. Quote, a very hard worker. I don't think it came easy to him. On April 1st, Joel was once again at his 7-Eleven payphone, and Detective Hollis was the one eavesdropping. And he heard Joel say, quote, so I'm staying at my mom's until I find a place. No, I don't want to stay here long in case they drive by and see me. Let me ask you something. Are you getting any heat yet? They want a chainsaw on the table or something. They want glitz and glamour. Then he was heard saying, quote, make 25 big ones for not doing anything? Why not? Got this lawyer down here so it doesn't look like the buddy-buddy system. I'm out $1,400 already, 3 hours yesterday and 1 today. No, I didn't tell them anything. Can't you find anyone cheaper in Los Angeles, Fresno, or San Francisco? I don't care. And Joel then ended this call with, quote, see what you can find out and get back to me. Joel then asked whether he should get his fixed wing, which is the regular airplane license, since he now had a bunch of time. Joel then returned to his mother's until 3 p.m. and then returned to his payphone. Now, Sousa, when Joel left his mom's house, he assumed that's where Joel was headed. So he had radioed ahead to another team member, Detective James Lee, to position himself so that he could already be at the payphones when Joel got there. In addition, Detective Lee was also armed with a tape recorder in a fanny pack. But of course, right, just as Joel approaches, like, the parking lot, got super loud with, like, music and cars and everything, of course. So by the time everything quieted down, Detective Lee overheard Joel saying, in a very agitated tone, quote, "It's a news blitz. Things are going to blow up, I'm telling you. This guy looked like a Fresno news guy. You never know. I don't want no fucking stock options. I want $250,000 and I want it now. What? I want to go around the world. We know how much your thing was, right? Then tell this guy to step on it." And with that, Joel slammed his phone down and went back to his car. Now, apparently the comment about 25 big ones was exactly the ammunition that Sousa needed to get a search warrant on the phone. And this search warrant that he filed would require the phone company to hook up a dialed number recorder, a DNR, to that payphone. And the DNR would record all the outgoing numbers made from that phone. And the phone company told Sousa, yeah, we can go ahead and hook up the DNR, but you're going to need like an actual, we're going to need like a separate warrant to hand over those DNR records to you. The next day on April 2nd, Joel was back at his payphone and he said into the receiver, quote, "I have the feeling this thing is going to blow up, Dana. What about that? I need money." Records showed that Joel had made a 2-second call to Dana's dorm room, followed a short while later to a payphone booth at a Wendy's in Santa Clara. So we're in April, right? The 1-year anniversary is coming up at the case at this point in time. And with that, right, this was already a huge case when it happened, but with the 1-year anniversary now, putting like a new spotlight on it, there was a whole new wave of media and press blitz about the case. And this was despite the fact that the Fresno authorities had remained pretty much tight-lipped throughout all of this. They had not commented publicly on what they were doing or anything like that. And it was pretty much well known at this point in time that Dana was the prime suspect in his family's murder and that he had hired someone to take them out. So in response, right, to this increased scrutiny, this new highlight on the case, in the first week of April, Dana released a public statement, and it read, quote, "On April 19th, 1992, 4 wonderful lives ended in tragedy. My father, my mother, and my sister were brutally murdered. My world was shattered and my life was changed forever. The reality of a loss like this can hardly be imagined even after this length of time. I must say that this tragedy has been deepened by those in the media who have spread gossip and innuendo, which was unsupported by fact or distorted reality. Those reporters who have been inaccurate or sensationalist in their stories are doing a disservice to the public, my family, and me. I understand the sheriff's office is following all possible avenues of investigation. They have said they are eliminating no one until the killer or killers are found, and I understand this to be the usual methods in such an investigation. I have spoken with them and posted a large reward, and I hope this will assist the sheriff's detectives." This kid, dude, you just can't even cosplay as a human. By this point in time, Joel had also retained a defense attorney, Terrence Terry Wolf, and he issued a public statement on the behalf of his client, And in a statement, he was saying that they were incensed that authorities were saying that, like, Joel was dodging them, like in that LA Times article and whatnot. Quote, "He doesn't want to be in the public light, but he has not been hiding. Detectives talked to him and he gave them a full and complete statement. He is not a suspect." Sergeant Cottle announced that the increased reward money had not generated any new leads or anything like that, but he said they were still working the case. Quote, "We have tracked down a lot of rumor and innuendo without success, but we're still putting a major amount of effort into the investigation and we have not lost hope." On April 5th, Joel was, where do you think he was? Of course, at his payphone. Now, his first call that morning was to the Santa Clara Benson Center. Dana had a finance class in Kenna Hall, which was right across the street from there. Dana, at this point, had re-enrolled in SCU. He had re-enrolled in the spring 1993 quarter. So Dana had a finance class across the street from the center at 9:15 a.m. And this call to the center that Joel had placed lasted about 10 minutes, and it ended at 9:10 a.m. Joel then called Wolf's office, his attorney, once again from this payphone. Quote, "Is Mr. Wolf there? I'm a referral from Mr. Berman. I need to see him. Just tell him it's Joel. He'll know who it is. It's in regard to a homicide. Radisfitch, Radovcich. Who is this? Well, be careful you don't tell anyone. Now, while it was helpful to see who Joel was calling, right? Obviously Dana and Santa Clara. What Sousa and the team really needed to know was who was paging Joel. You know, what were the numbers paging Joel? And they wondered if maybe they might be able to clone Joel's pager. Now, the thing is, though, most times when law enforcement did this, cloned pagers, it was usually done in narcotics cases. There had never been a homicide case where they had cloned a pager before. And as you can guess, right, this required like a very special, specific kind of warrant. Now, getting help from the narcotics team, Sousa was able to obtain such a warrant. And he was able to obtain this warrant by using the fact that Joel was observed using a pager and then making return calls from payphones. And since they were also keeping an eye on Dana at the same time, who was in Santa Clara, it was, you know, super obvious that it was Dana who was paging Joel. And this like constant, very discreet communication between the two of them clearly pointed to, you know, the fact that they were in cahoots somehow, right? And on April 12th, Fresno County Superior Court Judge Dwayne Keyes agreed to allow Sousa to clone Joel's pager. And this was based on everything, the team had uncovered so far. It was enough. And so Sousa and the team ended up with Joel's cap code. And this is the computer-generated number inside of a pager that defines its number. And they had a cap code identical to Joel's. Now, the same day the warrant was signed on April 12th, just before 10 a.m., Detectives Moore and Adolph Lyons called up Sousa to be like, bro, we ran into Joel in Fresno. Moore told Sousa, quote, Lyons and I were sitting at a light at Fresno and M Streets, and Lyons says, Jesus Christ, is that Joel Radisfitch? Joel had pulled up right next to them in his Honda. Quote, I looked over and almost pissed my pants. It was Joel all right, but he did something to his hair, dyed it shoe polish black, as if no one will recognize him now. Joel had also cut his hair. Remember what Rose, the Ewell's housekeeper, had said? So at that moment that Moore was talking to Sousa, Joel had gone to the Vaughn's grocery store, and Lyons was in there following him. Now, as Moore was on the phone talking to Sousa, telling him all this, Joel was on the move yet again. Quote, oops, he's moving. This boy doesn't let any moss grow on him. Okay, man, it appears he's headed over to Sunnyside, which is the Ewell home. Here we go. Damn, John, he must have a garage door opener or something, because we can't see his car in the Ewell's driveway. And Moore continued updating Sousa on Joel's movements as they monitored him. At 12:25 p.m., Joel left the Ewell's, and by 12:56 p.m., he was leaving Fresno. By 2:25 p.m., Joel had arrived in Santa Clara, and he went to a 7-Eleven to use the payphone. Records showed that Joel phoned up a female friend that he had at SCU. He also phoned Dana's dorm room twice. But unfortunately, the conversations were too short for any type of, recording to be done. At 3:14 p.m., Joel drove through the dorm area at SCU, and 10 minutes later, quote, another 7-Eleven. Looks like he's just waiting. Oops, he grabbed a phone. Must have been waiting on an incoming call. And then, at 3:50 p.m., quote, we got something, John. Gold Mercedes rolling up into the 7-Eleven lot. Lordy Lord, it's Dana Ewell himself. They're having a little rap session by the cars. Dana and Joel left the 7-Eleven parking lot together in Dana's Mercedes, and Detective Mindy Ibarra and a team followed them. The team lost them for a few minutes, but at 4:12 p.m., they spotted Dana's car in the parking lot of Aris Helicopters. Shortly after that, at 4:30 p.m., Dana and Joel were spotted coming out of a 1-hour photo. Quote, we got them coming out of a 1-hour photo. They're looking at pictures and laughing. Damn, I'd like to get a look at those shots. Now they're going into El Pollo Loco. Guess Joel couldn't find a stinking Taco Hell. At 6:22 p.m., Dana pulled back into the 7-Eleven parking lot, and he and Joel remained inside his car for about an hour. And then Joel got out, went to his car, and the two went their respective ways. Meanwhile, the detectives were trying to test the cloned pager that they had of Joel's, but it wasn't working. So on April 21st, Sousa revisited Communications HQ in Beverly Hills to inform them that the cloned pager they had given them was not working. They fixed it and Sousa left. However, just a couple hours later, Sousa got a call from the Communication HQ, and they told him that, yo, Joel just paid us a little visit. Quote, Radisvich told us he's been getting strange pages over the last few weeks. We told him that maybe his number was being usurped by drug dealers. He was a bit paranoid, this guy. Frankly, so were we, what with him possibly involved in killings. I expected him to pull out a chainsaw or something, but we almost fainted when he asked if we'd been served with a search warrant on his pager. They fed him the drug dealer line again, and Sousa asked if Joel had bought it. Quote, sort of, but when he saw his name on the computer screen, he squirmed and asked us to relist his account under the name Mike Smith. Hey, I wasn't about to tick this guy off. We changed his name on the computer and I gave him a new number. Remember that cap code we talked about? That's how you get your calls. And we didn't change Joel's cap code, so you'll still get whatever pages he gets. And in late April, Joel moved out of his mother's home, and he moved into an apartment in Costa Mesa, which is south of LA. And he was also frequenting the 7-Eleven payphone that was right near his apartment. And Sousa had the DNR switched to that payphone. So, right, all this, the surveillance is continuing on Dana and Joel. The teams are in constant contact with one another. They're, remember, these are teams coordinating in Northern California and Southern California at the same time. So, they're keeping in constant communication and updating each other. On May 12th, Detective Christian Chris Curtis had an idea that he was hoping might sort of spook Dana. Maybe spook him into making a mistake. So Detective Curtis and another detective, Chris Osborne, headed to SCU. Curtis ended up telling Sousa via phone what they had encountered. Quote, Osborne and I get to campus about 9 a.m. and we check in with campus security. Then, as we're walking across the parking lot, we spot Dana coming the other way. He was supposed to be in a class at that time, but he wasn't. Osborne says to me out of the corner of his mouth, does he recognize you? And I say, probably. So we just keep on going like nothing's up, but Dana takes a long look at us. We stop near the library for a quick peek back, and Dana's doing the old private eye routine, standing by a light pole pretending to read a paper, but checking us out. So on we go on our merry way again, but we spot Dana at a fast walk toward us, with that weird Dana walk, chin out, head jerked forward, fists going back and forth. We duck into the campus bookstore, and he practically runs in after us. Osborne hangs around a rack of postcards. I'm at the southeast corner of the place, pretending to look through textbooks. Then, bingo, Dana's standing right next to me, as if he's looking to buy a textbook. I mean, nobody's fooling nobody. I cruise over next to Osborne. Dana follows, and he sort of bumps Osborne. I look at a rack of cards. Dana's next to me, brushes my arm. Finally, at one rack, he gets on the opposite side of me and just stares at me, like I'm supposed to be terrified or something. I wanted to drag his skinny ass outside and pound the shit out of him, but, regulations. He finally cleared out, and we heard over the radio that Dana was leaving the campus. That very same evening, Detectives Curtis and Burke returned to the SCU campus. And guys, you guys are gonna love this. You're just gonna love this, because, Dana's a little asshole. You're gonna love this. So the detectives returned to the campus around 8 p.m. that night, and they asked campus public safety to escort them to the Casa Italiana dorms, and specifically to room 340, Dana's. So one of the security officers knocked and identified themselves, and Dana was pretty stunned to see 2 campus security officers and the 2 detectives at his door. And he just starts off, quote, what are you doing here? Why'd you bring these men here? Obviously, right, talking to the campus officers. Curtis then said, quote, Dana, we have information on who might have killed your family. And Dana said this was neither the appropriate time nor place. But Curtis just kept pressing, quote, Dana, I think this is an appropriate place for you to learn who our suspect is. They also noticed at this point, because they were able to sort of peek around Dana, they noticed that Monica, his girlfriend, was in the room with him. Curtis then asked Dana, yo, do you not want to know who killed your family? And Dana was like, well, yeah, of course I do. But I need to call my lawyer and make some phone calls and stuff, But Curtis just said, quote, go ahead, but I don't think it's necessary. I just don't understand why you're being uncooperative. I figured you'd want to know who killed your parents and sister. And instead of answering him, Dana then started badgering the campus officers, just oh, what's the protocol of having someone on here, and just demanding to know, oh, what right do you have to, bring him here and this, that, and the other. And the security officer just kind of shrugged and just what he wants to do, brah, they're police and they need help. So yeah, we're going to help them. In a very mocking tone, Dana then asked Curtis if he enjoyed his visit to campus earlier. And Curtis, of course, also wanting to be a smarmy dick right back, was like, yeah, I actually did. And Dana just retorted with, quote, well, I filed a report against you with campus security. Now, if you have a local number, I can give you a call. Curtis was like, Dana, you already have it. Quote, I'll do that. How would you like it if someone came banging on your door at 11 at night like this? And Curtis, looked at his watch and said, quote, Dana, it's only 8, first off, and generally family members are happy to receive this kind of information at any time. Dana then just addressed the security officers again and just whined, quote, I have my rights here and I don't wish to speak with these men right now. And then Curtis was like, all right, started to turn away. quote, "Okay, Dana, you know how to get a hold of us." And as Dana went to shut the door, Curtis stepped forward and said, quote, "By the way, just so you know, the information we have leads us to believe that Joel Radisvich killed your family." And with that, they left, hoping that they had really, really rattled Dana. And Curtis immediately called up Sousa to let him know what Dana's reaction was. Quote, "It looked like someone punched Dana in the gut. I mean, he was fish belly white, and for once, he was speechless." Now, Sousa, at that moment that Curtis was talking to him, was staking out Joel in SoCal. And he was really hoping, oh, sweet, hopefully, maybe Joel will get a page from Dana or something, And this, of course, would just, prove more of a conspiracy between them. But he didn't. Meanwhile, Curtis was still keeping an eye on Dana and updating Sousa on the phone at the same time. He then saw Dana and a dressed-up Monica leave the dorm, which, by the way, Curtis thought was appropriate to comment on how nice Monica's legs were. She is a 19-year-old college student at this point in time. Just saying, And it's that kind of stuff in writing that actually made me not a fan of the book. But anyway, Dana and Monica left the dorm and they went to the public safety office. And when they were in there, Curtis saw that Dana was peeking out the windows and the blinds and stuff. Then after they left the public safety office, Dana and Monica got in his car and they got on the southbound 880 freeway. Quote, "He's in the number 1 lane, moving pretty good. Shit, he just darted across 3 lanes and caught the exit. Shit, I can't make it across without killing a few motorists. I have to admit, Dana used solid counter-surveillance driving techniques. God damn it." However, at that very same moment, Sousa's cloned pager went off, and it was alerting him that a Santa Clara number was paging Joel. Now, Sousa had this thick stack of papers in front of him that had all the Santa Clara numbers, and he was trying to identify that number, but he couldn't identify it. And through some quick thinking and contacting the phone company, they were able to assess the location that Dana had paged Joel from. Sousa was able to relay that to Curtis, who was then able to track Dana down. Quote, "Got him. He's pulling out of a parking lot. Looks like an office complex of some kind. The whole area is dark as the wrong side of the moon. Moore's picking him up. We'll go verify the number on the phone." Now, looking through phone records, detectives were able to see that Dana had immediately phoned up Berman, and this was in his dorm after the detective's visit, but then he had traveled to that complex to call Joel. On May 14th, Joel was paged by the Holiday Inn payphone, and it was the Holiday Inn located at the Fresno Air Terminal, the same air terminal that Dana just so happened to have flown into that day. Detective Cynthia Knight was the one who was wired and ready to go to eavesdrop on Joel, and Detective Scott Jones was away. I think he was in a car or something, and he was writing notes. He was recording what Knight's wire caught and jotting down phrases and stuff as he heard them. So you've got 2 people here kind of taking notes and whatnot. Detective Knight said that Joel was already on the phone when she took position near him around 6 p.m. and phone records would show that Joel had actually made that call at 5:39 p.m. So he had been talking about 20 minutes when Detective Knight took her position. The call lasted about 45 minutes, and records show it was made to that Holiday Inn. Now, some of the phrases Detective Knight heard during this conversation were, quote, "I'm a little worried. I'm going to ditch this place. Play it cool." Joel also talked about the stock market, talked about $25 million, and then he talked about $1 million, and then stated that he had tickets all over the place. I guess Joel had gotten pulled over, just not when the detectives were watching him. 20 minutes later, Joel made a second phone call. This one lasted about 10 minutes. And the detectives then overheard the phrases, quote, "Don't worry about it. She doesn't know anything. She's about to burst. She can't say anything. She won't. I miss you. They think they got something, evidence. They need to make an arrest. Politically, they need it. Just play the game. I think it's going well. I advise you not to talk to them. They blew it. They blew it at the first." And that call ended with the phrase, quote, "They had everything to lose and nothing to gain." And it is not known who this call was to. The third call Joel made lasted about 18 to 19 minutes, and it included the phrases, quote, "They can't tap your phone. It's against the law in this country. If you love me, you won't say anything. Don't talk to them. You don't have to. Don't say anything. They don't have a gun to your head. They spread lies. They hope to trip you up. They try to catch you in a lie. If you talk to them, they'll mix you up and twist your words. Go have breakfast with Pete. I love you." Detective Jones's notes stated that at various times he heard the phrases, quote, "They need to make an arrest to take the political heat off of them. They don't have evidence. They will try to catch you in a lie. They might try to plant evidence. They plant marijuana. Nothing to gain, everything to lose. You just don't think you'll win the game. If you care about me, I advise you not to talk to them. They're going to lock you up. I can't be around you. My life is fucked. You need to keep on repeating it. They will play on your fear, and I love you too. Phone records would show that Joel did make calls to his brother Peter and his mother. Now, around the middle of May, detectives Curtis and Burke found Jennifer Nunacoven McDonald. Remember Joel's friend? We talked about her in last week's video. And they wanted to know a little bit more about Joel from her. Like, was he into weapons and guns? Had he ever mentioned anything about the Ewell murders or anything like that? Jennifer said, no, never. I have no idea what you're talking about. And Curtis was like, well, you know, in that case, you totes wouldn't mind coming down and do a lie detector test. And Jennifer was like, yeah, for sure. Set it up. When do you want to set it up? And Curtis informed her that they would call her later in the week to set it up. A few days later, on May 18th, Joel phoned up Jennifer, and Detective Toby Rain was the one who eavesdropped. Now, it started off, pretty innocuous enough, but then Joel's mood suddenly changed, and Rain heard, quote, "What? Say it. Oh, did he? With them? Oh my God, Jen, did you talk with your parents about this? Oh, Jen, lie detector tests are very false. If this says you're wrong, oh boy, Jen, you are not taking this test. You're trusting them? Jen, you're getting in way too deep. They cannot demand you take a lie detector test. Jen, they can't. I know you're not part of this, but you should have told me. When did they ask? Jen, listen to me. I'll call you right back, okay?" Joel then phoned up his attorney's offices. Wolf, quote, "Yeah, this is Joel. It's sort of an emergency. The Fresno sheriffs have been harassing one of my friends to take a lie detector test." "What? They think she knows something and she's going to take a test. So if she doesn't, nothing will happen to her?" "Well, she said they told her she has to." "All right, she can call you? All right, thanks a lot. You're welcome." Joel then phoned Jennifer back up. Quote, "All right, Jen, this is what I want you to do. What time tomorrow will they do it?" 2. "Okay, what you do is talk to my attorney. They're very unreliable. Obstruction of justice is a bunch of bullshit. Jen, this is some serious shit. Jen, this isn't funny. Look at what they're doing to me. People get put away for lifetimes and find out later, oops, they made a mistake. Jen, it isn't funny. They will destroy your life. I advise you to call my guy and seek his advice. Okay, I gotta go. Get this straight, okay? All right, I love you. All right, gotta go." And of course, just to, reiterate, remember, Joel and Jennifer were not in a relationship. They were just platonic friends. The next day, May 19th, Joel left his apartment at 7:19 a.m. and he went to another payphone to call Dana. Detective Jerry Haroldson was the one eavesdropping this time, and he noted just how shitty and stressed and exhausted Joel looked. He looked like he had been ridden hard and put up wet. He heard Joel say, quote, "Been up all night, haven't slept. I called my guy at 12. He's serious. Okay, Dana, okay. She says okay, she'll think about it. I called her parents and told them what kind of deep shit she's into. I called her, and then I called my wolf guy," referring to his attorney, "that he was going to call her back. I know, dude. I figured they got a tap or something. I got 1/4 left. They either have the phones tapped or I think snitches. Someone is running around listening. I figured they've got a tap or something." And near the end of the call, Detective Haroldson heard the phrases, quote, "I'm going to call her parents and call my guy to make sure because I'm scared to death. I mean, she knows nothing. Gotta be something ridiculous. That's the point of all points. That's why she's so willing to do this." 1 hour later, Joel called his attorney. Quote, "Okay, Mr. Wolf, I can assure you she knows nothing, but what if they find me? Can they arrest me?" Now, this lie detector test would end up never taking place. But based on Joel's reaction, police didn't think this whole thing was like a waste of time, right? Clearly, Joel was very rattled at the idea of one of his friends talking to the police. A few days after this, Jennifer did talk to police, and she was accompanied by her dad. She swore Joel had never said anything to her about murder, about guns, about anything related to that at all. Although she did say Joel was bragging that he would be a millionaire by the time he was 25 years old. By the tail end of May, Joel was back at his payphone, and Detective Rain, wearing the usual, wired setup, strolled up to the payphones and lifted the receiver to one as if he was going to use it. And that's when Joel turned around and told him that he was using it. And Rain was like, "Well, aren't you using that one?" Pointing to the other one. And Joel told him, quote, "I'm using both of them. Use the phone across the street." And after some words, Rain acted like all offended and then slammed the phone down and then walked away. The surveillance team that night would end up heading back to Fresno with Sousa staying behind to keep an eye on Joel. Sousa set up at the Red Lion Hotel, and it was right across the street from Joel's payphone. He set up a spotting scope on a tripod, and he took studious notes on the dates, times, and all kinds of details whenever Joel made these calls from this payphone. The DNR did state that police should witness these calls, and Sousa decided to take notes because he wanted to just make absolutely certain that all this evidence that they were gathering with the surveillance and stuff would be admissible. Now, after observing Joel for for a while, and, he had been observing Joel for quite some time at this point. And Sousa was wondering at this point in time if Joel maybe wasn't asexual, because he didn't, we went over it in part 2, right? He had quite a few girls who had the hots for him. He never really reciprocated. He didn't seem to be checking out, men or women, even if he was being flirted with. And Sousa was just wondering, like, oh, I wonder if this kid's like asexual or something. Because again, he's been monitoring and watching this kid for quite some time. So one evening, after making a phone call, Joel went into the 7-Eleven and played his favorite pinball machine. It was a Terminator 2 pinball machine, and he got his ass kicked. And Joel, slammed the glass with his fist, all pissed. And then, after checking that no one was around, Joel then went and yanked the cord forcefully out of the wall and smiled. He walked away, and then, standing a few feet from the pinball machine, turned around and lifted his finger like a gun and fired an imaginary bullet at the pinball machine and blew smoke from the imaginary barrel. At 4:38 p.m. on June 3rd, Joel got a page, and it was to call someone named Ernest Jack Pon. And we will get more into him in just a moment. Just remember that name. So this man named Ernest Jack Pon paged Joel. The number was followed by 00. 7 minutes later, a second page came in, and it had come from a payphone in a soundproof booth at the San Jose Jet Center, a corporate jet operations area at the San Jose airport. That number was followed by 55. At 4:42 p.m., Joel was seen leaving his mother's house, and this time he drove to a different set of payphones that was near a market. And this time it was Detective Avila who was eavesdropping on Joel. And around this exact same time, at 4:55 p.m., as Joel was talking on the payphone, 300 plus miles away, Detective Neil Dadayan observed Dana using a payphone in the San Jose Jet Center. Remember, in the soundproof booth? And this was also the same booth that he had seen Dana using before. And since this was in a soundproof booth, he wasn't able to hear Dana's side of the conversation. Avila, meanwhile, was able to hear Joel's side of the conversation. Quote, "Then why don't they just pick us up? I call him like I just called him. Now, I got to talk to my guy and see if they can actually charge me with something in that, 3-shirt deal. I don't know how far that goes. Yeah, no problem. Right. Okay, but I wish I could find a place. No, I was just calling to say we gotta be extra careful. You never know what they might hold. Yeah, okay. If there's anything you need, that's the deal. We just gotta hang tough. All right, later." Joel ended the call at 5:04 p.m., and at 5:08 p.m., he made a 2-minute phone call. Quote, okay, I'll see ya. Sure. All right, yeah. And at 5:10 p.m., he hung up and left. Meanwhile, up in NorCal, since he wasn't able to eavesdrop, Detective Dadayan went to his car to wait for Dana to leave. And Dana would finally leave the Jet Center at 5:53 p.m. On June 8th, Joel used his payphone once again, although this time he did not deposit any quarters into it before dialing. He studied a piece of paper, and unfortunately, the detectives were unable to hear the beginning of the conversation due to, just all the traffic and street noise and stuff like that. But when Joel turned towards Detective Haraldson, who was eavesdropping, he heard, quote, "Yeah, $431.89. How much for the cover charge? $369? That's the difference? We just had $369. Okay, grand total, $431.89. How long will it take to ship? Okay, thank you very much." Joel then went into the 7-Eleven and purchased 2 money orders. The next day on June 9th, Sousa got the DNR that showed the 1-800 number that Joel had called. It was to a Georgia-based company called Bookmasters. Sousa called and asked what they had that would total $431.69. They said that would be their electronic lockpick, and Sousa asked what that was for. Quote, by a locksmith? This device will unlock most types of locks in 7 seconds. And after explaining who he was, why he was calling, Sousa wanted to know the name of someone who had placed an order for that electronic lockpick on June 8th, and it would have been about 2 p.m. their time. And he wanted to know the name on the order, but obviously, right, the caller on the other end was very hesitant to give out that kind of information. And she was like, oh, well, I don't think I'm supposed to, give that information. And then Sousa was just like, oh, well, I don't think you should be sending lockpicks to just anyone. Really, asshole? Because, if it was illegal, why would they be doing it out in the open? What 800 number anyone can call, So, I don't know what he wanted this poor caller to do, but I would be in the same way. I'd be like, all right, bro, but, I don't want to get fired. you know. The caller said what their company did was perfectly legal, and Sousa, being like kind of fed up, just said, you know, basically laid out like, look, I'm working a triple homicide and I need your assistance. And he also informed her that the person he was looking for on this order had also paid it with a money order. And so the caller reluctantly agreed to call Sousa when it came in. Quote, but when we get his order, we can call you then. How's that? And it would be around this time that Detective Burke had to step away from the case due to some family obligations, and Detective Curtis would be Sousa's main partner. Although Burke would still work on the case. He just wouldn't be like, you know, one of the main detectives working it. And Dana's nickname for the new detective duo was Mutt and Jeff. During the same month of June, the courts halted Dana from acquiring his sister Tiffany's estate. So apparently, Captain Kenneth Hogue wrote a letter to the Ewell's family probate lawyer, remember Dowling, and he had written this letter on June 11th. And in this letter, Captain Hogue stated, quote, after lengthy investigation and with deliberations with the Fresno County District Attorney's Office, it is the position of our department that Dana Ewell is to be considered a prime suspect in the investigation. Dana's status as like the prime suspect in his family's murder was now official. And obviously, Dana would know this. On June 12th, Joel went to his brother Peter and his wife Danielle's apartment in Reseda. And when Joel actually drove up to the apartment, Peter also drove up in another vehicle. They arrived at the same time. Joel parked his car in their garage. They closed the garage door, and Peter kept his car outside. And he specifically left it right outside his garage door. Peter entered his apartment, which was on the second floor, and a woman, who they presumed to be Danielle, looked toward the street, you know, kind of like checking to make sure it's clear, and then made like a come on motion to someone. Joel then dashed across the street and into his brother's apartment. And several times after this, Peter and Danielle would continuously go out their apartment and look in the street, kind of like looking up and down and whatnot, to see if they had been like followed or were being watched or something. Meanwhile, on that same day, over at Santa Clara University, Dana graduated summa cum laude, and his degree was in commerce. And by this point in time, he had sold Western Piper to Bob Purcell, if you will remember, was Dale's top salesman. And though Dana requested that his name appear in the commencement, he filed paperwork to have his college records sealed until at least October 11th, 1994. The day after his graduation, on June 13th, he and Monica flew to Cancun, Mexico. On June 14th, around 11 p.m., Sousa, who was at home, and his cloned pager suddenly went off. The page said 222, and then multiple more pages came in after that, followed by 111. And then that followed by 000. And then Dana's Santa Clara number, which Sousa recognized by this point, also came in. Sousa called the Costa Mesa PD in SoCal, and he asked Sergeant Farron to scope out the payphone that Joel usually used, and to report back if someone matching Joel's description was there. The Santa Clara number and variations of it came in about 4 or 5 more times before Sergeant Farron called Sousa back, and he confirmed that yes, it was Joel. The next day, when Sousa got the DNR, it showed that Joel had actually paged himself several times. 4 days later, on June 19th, Dana and Monica returned from Cancun, and detectives couldn't help but notice that the Santa Clara era numbers that had been paging Joel had stopped completely during this time. And not long after Dana's return, the manager at Bookmasters called Sousa. Quote, my operator remembers this guy. Apparently he called a few times, got a catalog sent out, and then he mailed in his order. We sent 1 lockpick to a Jack Ponce in San Bernardino. And this was the first time that Ernest Jack Ponce's name was brought up to police. He went by Jack. So yeah, Ernest Jack Ponce, again, going by Jack, grew up in the San Bernardino area, and like most of the assholes in this story, grew up with a pretty privileged upbringing. His father, Dr. Ernest A. Ponce, was a very successful dentist, and his mother was Sally Ponce. Jack also had an older sister named Sabrina, and his parents divorced in 1978, with Sally getting primary custody of both Jack and Sabrina. Dr. Ponce would end up remarrying a woman named Jan. He had stayed in the area and really grown his business and his practice, and he became very, very successful in doing so. And he and his new wife, Jan, donated a lot of their time, specifically to the Assistance League Children's Dental Health Center, and they were also members of the Arrowhead Country Club. Jack also attended the same prestigious school that the Radisviches did, and he graduated in 1986 alongside Peter. Neighbor Don Niemeyer, who actually watched Jack, grow up from afar, said, quote, every once in a while you would see him with a different girl. I guess you could say he was playing the field. Now, Jack and Peter were pretty close in high school, but as so often happens, right, the two kind of lost touch. Now, after high school, it was said Jack was contemplating maybe following in his father's footsteps, but then he decided that he either wanted to go into medicine or law. He attended UCLA, and in 1990, he and Peter rekindled their friendship. This is also when Jack got to know Peter's younger brother, Joel. And Jack even let Joel sublet his apartment in Santa Monica in the summer of 1991. Jack was attending UCLA at this time, and yeah, he let Joel sublet his apartment. And it is during this summer that Jack and Joel would actually commit a few felonies together. Jack would later say, quote, I had purchased it wasn't salvaged, but it was crashed motorcycle. I wanted to be able to fix it up. He said he and Joel found a matching Kawasaki Ninja motorcycle on the UCLA campus in the parking lot. They got it started, stole it, and drove it back to Jack's apartment. They then repaired Jack's motorcycle with the stolen one and some other parts that Jack had bought. I love these rich assholes, by the way, like committing felonies and stealing. Like, can you believe this? I actually can. But that wasn't the only felony they did. Quote, we stole another motorcycle with the idea of making a profit on it, but that didn't happen. However, they were able to commit another felony successfully. Quote, yes, we did. Joel crashed his Honda and needed a part for it. I stood outside while he stole one. Then we went to a garage and took the part he needed. Jack ended up graduating UCLA with a degree in history in 1992. So that was Ernest Jack Ponce, referred to him as Jack from now on. That was this third player that now has seemingly cropped up in this investigation. So going back, right, to this, Sousa is, discovering all this information and the lockpick and all that. And just at that moment, Burke bursts into Sousa's office and says, quote, okay, bud, Tom DeWong just called. It seems Joel, that is Tom DeWong, received a catalog from the company that sent Joel the silencer books. The company was Presidio Press. But when police had contacted them, they said, like, no, we don't sell any type of like manuals or magazines or anything like that. However, their parent company, which was based in Colorado, Paladin Press, did. And so Burke continued telling Sousa, quote, the catalog has books on silencers, bombs, how to dispose of a corpse, how to spy on people, all kinds of nasty shit. And the people at Paladin Press were more than happy to help Sousa, but they did inform Sousa that their computers purged records every year. But quote, we have them in hard copy. The original order forms, whether they're coupons out of magazine ads or handwritten pages or crayon on paper bags, are collected and stored in a manila envelope at the end of each day. The problem was that on any given day, there were like about 300 orders in each of these envelopes. The financial manager agreed to let Sousa come in and sift through the orders to see if he could find what he was looking for. And so, on June 24th, Sousa flew to Denver, Colorado, rented a car, and then drove to Boulder. At Paladin, he gave them a starting point of June 1991, and he was then handed 30 bulging manila envelopes, over 9,000 orders to go through. And after 3 days of sifting through all the order forms and getting the envelopes for May of 1991, Sousa finally hit pay dirt. And this was after hours of work. Can you imagine? So the order form he saw was typed, and it read, quote, please send me the following titles. Homemade C4, $12. How to get anything on anybody, $30. Improvised explosions, $10. Radio detecting techniques, $10. Smart bombs, $12. The Anarchist Arsenal, $12. The Hey Duke Silencer book, $10. Home Workshop Silencers, $12. Death Trap, $15. And New ID in America, $15. Attached to this was a 4-inch by 2-inch coupon, and it was from a May 1991 issue of American Survival Guide. And it had the handwritten name and address of Tom DeWong. There was another order form, again, with Tom's name and address. And this was for over $400 worth of instruction on lockpicking, surveillance, eavesdropping techniques, something called the Whispering Death. And in the same handwriting as the first order form, the customer had also written, quote, I wish to have the letter opener for my purchase of $65 or over. Sousa purchased a copy of each book and then turned them over to Alan Boudreau. If you will remember, he's the one who was analyzing the murder weapon and the bullets, and he's trying to figure out what was the murder weapon used. They have determined that a silencer was used, but now Boudreau had to figure out, okay, what kind of silencer? And if you remember at this time, Boudreau had to actually request a special type of permission, whatever, to build a silencer, which he did get. And he had just started recreating different silencers, trying to recreate those markings on the murder bullets. He used an Etratech Tech 9, and just started attaching different types of silencers that he had formulated onto it. And finally, after so much testing, Boudreaux finally hit pay dirt. And he wrote in his report, quote, 9 3/16-inch holes were drilled into the barrel from the outside. As expected, drilling left burrs around the drill hole inside the barrel. Recovered bullets from test firing are remarkably like the murder bullets. So apparently, common technique in these like how-to manuals that Joel had gotten called for the crude porting or drilling of holes in the gun barrels before sliding the silencer over it. So I guess through porting, the explosive effects of the gases that, exit the barrel when you shoot is significantly reduced by doing this. And the high decibel shockwave is vented more evenly and quietly through those holes. Now, the first few shots Boudreaux tried with this type of handmade silencer, just shredded the bullets, the first few. But after that, the markings on the bullets that Boudreaux had fired were eerily similar to the markings on the murder bullets. And this was a huge break for him. So the surveillance on Joel and Dana continued, but in June, something happened. All right. So Detective Osborne was staking out Judy's house. She lived in a cul-de-sac. And Sousa was at the nearby park. The street Judy lived on, Bobby Boyer Street, marked the park's boundary. Osborne then called Sousa, quote, hey, Joel just came barreling out of the house. He stopped in the middle of the street, kind of frantic, looking up and down the road. Then he ran back. Oops, here comes the Honda. And Osborne quickly, dropped his phone. And he was really hoping Joel hadn't made him. He got back on the phone. Quote, John, he drove up and just stared at me for a minute. I'm taking off. Sousa then radioed Detective Rain, who was also in the area staking it out. And as he was radioing him, he saw him walking across the park and he was heading for, Bobby Boyer Street. But that's when, as he was on his way, that's when all of a sudden the Radisvich family van driven by Judy, screeched to a stop at the cul-de-sac and Joel jumped out of the passenger side and he ran towards the park gate. And as this was going down, Rain saw this and he quickly scrambled up a tree so Joel wouldn't be able to see him. And so Sousa is watching all this through binoculars, right? And he sees that Joel looks very agitated. He's walking very fast and he's noticing that Joel is holding something. And for a split second, he's like, holy shit, is this kid about to go gun down one of my detectives? But thankfully, it was just a camera. And so, sneakily, Detective Rain got down from the tree. And because his path was about to cross Joel's. And so as that was about to happen, Detective Rain, decided, to call out to a child, acting like he was there with a child and was calling out to them. And so as they passed, that's what Detective Rain was doing. And Joel didn't give him a second glance. Joel went back to the van and Judy drove off and she was driving towards the direction that Sousa was currently in. And he quickly ducked down in a seat as Joel was hanging out the van window with his camera. And the other surveillance teams that were in the area started dispersing one by one. It was evident that, the jig was up. Joel was indeed aware he was being watched. And I guess as the team was clearing out, the van stopped by a detective. And I guess the detective just stuck his arm out the window and flipped Joel off. And a few minutes later, the van was gone. So the surveillance team then all met up at a health club parking lot, which was a few miles away. And they were, talking about what just happened. And the consensus seemed to be that, someone tipped Joel off that he was indeed being watched. And now they decide okay, well, do we go back to Judy's house to, surveil it now that our cover's blown or what? And so as they're discussing this, Joel's black Honda rolls up and stopped about 10 yards from the detectives. And Joel looked to be writing something very frantically. And he was fumbling with the camera at the same time. He was trying to write and take pictures at the same time. So he just looked like a bumbling moron. And Detective Hollis, who was a very big, muscular man and was a SWAT team leader, decided to stomp over to Joel and he started shouting, quote, hey, asshole, what the fuck are you looking at? Yeah, you dickhead, looking for someone? And I guess this intimidation tactic worked and Joel sped the fuck off. And so, it was funny, but at this point they're all right, surveillance is Joel knows that we're watching him. So they headed back to Fresno, and when Sousa got back to the office, he had Joel's financial records waiting for him. He was especially interested in any purchases Joel had made before the murders. He saw that Joel had shopped at a pool supply company and had filled a set of acetylene tanks, and he wondered if maybe this wasn't used to help build the silencer. Now, after Joel made the surveillance team Police were worried that Joel had fled the state because they couldn't get a beat on him. They didn't know where he was. They called Nick Johns at the body shop. Remember, he shredded Joel's alibi. He said he hadn't seen Joel, just, quote, I'm still sure I didn't see Joel on Easter. They tried Peter, Joel's brother. Quote, yeah, Joel told me he got an attorney, but he didn't know where he was. And they contacted Joel's previous flight school, who told them, quote, the lunatic took out $1 million Jet Ranger helicopter and taxied around the runway without authorization. That kid didn't give a shit about anything. Sousa even contacted Rick Memon, which was Joel's former trucker roommate, and he learned that Joel had answered a roommate wanted ad that Rick had put out in the recycler. He said Joel always paid in cash, was never any trouble, and was polite, if a bit quiet. He said Joel spent his days studying flight plans, eating carrots, celery, and Louis Rich turkey, which was weird because I thought Joel was a vegetarian. I don't know, is that like a vegetarian turkey or something? I don't know. And said that Joel would also listen to like brand new CDs. And that's what he spent his time doing. And Rick said Joel never once used the phone while he was there. Quote, I remember one day I came home and he heard on the answering machine that there was one call. I said, wonder if that's for you or me. He said, all paranoid, it couldn't be for me. Nobody knows that number. Now the weirdest thing about Joel though, according to Rick, was that he slept in a futon in his closet. And quote, I think he did talk to himself from time to time. So during that summer, Dale's brother and Dale's father, Austin Ewell, who had actually flown in from Ohio, all paid Detective Sousa a visit. So Austin wanted to know, straight up, get it like straight from the horse's mouth, what Sousa thought of Dana. Like, do you think he killed his family? Sousa just told him that they were suspicious of Dana and that he had not been eliminated as a suspect. So the next day, Austin then hired the Russ Georgeson law firm. It was actually the same law firm that handled the James J. Mitchell Trust. That was Glee's father, or it might have been her grandfather. But either way, it was from, Glee's family. And Austin hired this law firm to deny Dana any access to his inheritance money. Georgeson then sent a letter to the DA's office asking, is there ample evidence for this? They stated that they required it to determine if there was enough evidence to justify a civil action against Dana. And they questioned, quote, if there is a continued aggressive, diligent investigation being undertaken. And they also questioned whether an arrest could even be made after so much time. Quote, it is my honest, heartfelt belief the Fresno County Sheriff's Department has engaged to some extent upon a course of deceit in dealing with the various attorneys as to the quality and quantity of evidence acquired. The inevitable conclusion being substantial assets will be delivered to Dana Ewell. Right? Basically saying is look, if you don't give us the ammo that we need, there's nothing we can do to stop Dana from inheriting this money. In September, Joel was seen walking in between the cars, kind of he was trying to duck. He wasn't walking normally. And he was walking between cars that were at the end of the hangar at the Fresno Air Terminal where Dana had his plane stashed. So as Joel was walking up, Dana was doing his pre-flight check and he noticed Joel coming up. And when he saw him, he said something to the effect of, I didn't tell you could come out. Get back. And then Joel walked back and ducked in between the cars. And then when Dana was done with his pre-flight check and got in his plane and started the engine and all that, he signaled for Joel. And then Joel dashed from the cars to the plane and got inside. But when Dana's plane took off, only Dana was visible. On September 29th, detectives Sousa and Curtis flew to Ohio to speak with Austin. He had contacted the detectives, informing them that he had received communications from his grandson. And he pointed out he had only started receiving communications from Dana after he had hired the Georgeson law firm to deny Dana any inheritance. And Dana, was extremely pissed off as grandfather, and that just heightened Austin's suspicions even more. He then gave the detectives a letter that Dana had written him. And I'm gonna read it to you. So it read, quote, Dear Grandpa, hello, I hope your part of the country gets some rain soon. Encloses a copy of the objection I told you about on the phone the other day. I don't understand what Ben and Dan have talked you into doing, but you should know what your attorney is doing. My father would be absolutely disgusted at the course of events that Dan and Ben have caused. Grandpa, ... Very truly yours, Dana J. Ewell. Austin said Dana had always been strange, describing him as very conniving and lazy, acting like he was too good to do farm work. I guess every summer, the family made it a habit to visit Austin on his farm, and Dale would wake up early and do farm work just as he had as a boy, but Dana wouldn't. So, like I said, the Ewells made it a habit to visit Austin every summer, to visit, and Austin said Dana had phoned him up that past summer and was like, oh, hey, I'm going to come visit you. And Austin was like, yeah, no, I don't think that's a good idea. Let's wait till everything is settled first, right? He said Dana continued to call him and that some of the calls had a dark, threatening undertone to them. However, Dana's aunt and Dale's sister, Betty Whitted, Whitted? She was a college administrator and she had been completely taken in by her nephew. She was 100% on Dana's side. She was furious at her brother and father for what they were doing to her nephew. She thought that her brothers were just greedy and wanted Dale's money, which she said was rightfully Dana's. So yeah, there's some family dramas starting to happen, right? After Ohio, Curtis and Sousa then flew to Atlanta, Georgia to talk to Dr. Nick Radisvich, Joel's father. They tried to convince him that his son did have information about the Ewell murder case, and they tried to convince him that they believed Joel's life was in danger. Nick listened, but he was like, I can't be of any help, man. Me and my son are estranged, so there's nothing I could do to help you. So they flew back home, and it was at that point that Sousa went to the DA's office. Good Lord, I cannot talk. It is at that point that Sousa went to the DA's office when they got back from Georgia and wanted to get the arrest warrants for Dana and Joel. But District Attorney Ed Hunt and Chief Criminal Prosecutor Jim Opplinger refused to issue the warrants, saying that they 100% believed, like Sousa's work, they totally believed that Dana had hired Joel to kill his family. But at that point in time, there just was not enough evidence to bring them to trial. And they pointed out that, remember, if we bring them to trial and they get off, we can't bring them up again. We get this one shot and that's it. So this frustrated Sousa. And so he went back to the drawing board. Is like, okay, what else haven't I looked at? And that's when he realized, oh yeah, this Jack Pon guy. I never really dug into that lead. So let's go ahead and do that. So on October 8th, 1993, Sousa and Curtis paid Jack a visit to his San Bernardino home. He claimed not to have known Joel all that well, said that he knew Peter, and that the only way he knew Joel was through Peter. The detectives thought Jack was very smarmy, cocksure, like a very typical attitude of a trust fund brat, who thinks he, is hot shit and whatever. That was like the demeanor that they were getting from him. They asked if he had ever bought or received any goods for Joel. Jack said no. Jack said he had gone shooting with Peter at a range called Firing Line, but he had only gone there with Peter, not Joel. He admitted that he owned a few guns himself, but that's when Sousa interrupted him. Quote, Jack, why are you holding out on us? You say Joel never had anything sent to you. What about the electronic lockpick? And this is when Jack's poker face, one of the only people in this story that has a poker face, by the way, this is when his poker face faltered. He had this look on his face like, how the fuck did they know about that? Now, he didn't know, acting like he didn't know what it was. Quote, lockpick? You must mean a locking device, right? That's what it is. Sousa then asked, well, what is a locking device? And Jack's like, well, you'll have to ask Joel. Sousa then asked Jack why Joel needed something sent to his address. And why couldn't Joel have it sent to his own address? And Jack offered, well, maybe he didn't want the cops to know. And then Sousa was just like, quote, Jack, why wouldn't he want the cops to know? You're saying the device is to be used for illegal purposes? And Jack was stuttering and stumbling at this point. And he answered, quote, no, he moves around a lot. And I suppose it was easiest to send it here. Look, I have to go to work. They asked where he worked. Jack took a moment as if he was contemplating whether telling them or not. And then he finally admitted he was a bartender at a TGI Fridays in Ontario. This was the exact same TGI Fridays that the surveillance team had witnessed Joel going into. On October 11th, the code pager went off, and this time it was a San Diego number. Tracing the number, they could see that it was the San Diego Hilton. Sousa called the Hilton and asked the hotel's assistant security chief to go out to the payphones and see if someone matching Dana's description was there. The security chief confirmed that, someone looking just like Dana was indeed at one of the phone booths, and he was carrying an aluminum briefcase. The next day, on the 12th, the same number paged the Joel's pager, so the cloned pager as well, again. And this time, the security chief followed Dana, and he followed him out to the parking lot Dana got into his Mercedes. Now, Sousa and Curtis ended up flying all the way down to San Diego and staking out that Hilton to see if Dana showed up again, but he didn't. However, while they were there, they did learn that Monica was attending college in that area. And so, on October 21st, they decided to pay her home a visit. So they pulled up to her home just as she was pulling out of her driveway. Dana's Mercedes was nowhere to be found. And they followed Monica. She drove to the post office. And as soon as she got out of her car, Sousa and Curtis rounded on her. And when they saw her, they couldn't help but noticed just how much Monica had changed. She now wore very expensive clothes. Her makeup was like very expensive and like obviously, like professionally done and whatnot. And most strikingly was Monica had dyed her hair platinum blonde, the supposed color Dana preferred. Now, when they rounded on her, Monica just refused to talk to them, said, "My father's an FBI agent," and said, "I don't have to talk to you," and she got in her car and drove off. And quite frankly, I gotta say, as a woman, 2 men come up to me saying that they're detectives and stuff, like, I'd be freaking out too. Like, I get it, they're working a homicide case stuff, but like, yeah, I just couldn't help but think, like, as a woman, she's like a young woman, she's like, 20 or something at this point, 19, 20. Like, yeah, I'd be pretty freaked out too. The detective's next stop was to Dana's grandmother, Big Glee. Glee Mitchell, Glee's mother. She lived in a rest home in Turlock, and she was in her late 80s at this point. Sousa spoke with her, and as he spoke with her, Curtis kind of like walked around, her apartment stuff, and she noticed there were communications from Dana and Monica. Sousa asked Big Glee if she had authorized those 2 $5,660 withdrawals from her account and asked if they were for flight lessons. And she said she absolutely would have paid for Dana's flight lessons, but she would have never paid for his friend's flight lessons. Sousa then told her that he was sorry that her family was killed. And that's when Big Glee said, quote, "Oh, I thought they got sick and died." Yeah. A few days later, Dana learned of the detective's visit, and he called up the rest home and, threatened them with legal action and said, "You better not let anyone pretending to be a cop talk to my grandma," and blah, blah, blah. And the home then called Sousa and said, "Well, the cops are no longer welcome here," or whatever. And, Sousa wasn't having it. And he said, quote, "Listen, I'm working a triple homicide, and to do that, I may need to talk to Mrs. Mitchell. If you get in my way, I'll throw you in jail." And the director then agreed to inform Sousa of any movements that Dana made. That, of course, right, that they were aware of. So a few days after this, Sousa got a call from one of Judy's neighbors. He had befriended one of them as they were doing their surveillance. And they informed Sousa that the Radisviches were loading up a dumpster. They were cleaning out their garage. Sousa called the refuse service and learned that the dumpster had not yet been picked up due to a driver's illness. Burke was then sent to babysit this dumpster until they could search it. And as Sousa was on his way to the dumpster, he got a call from the refuse service again. Quote, "Yeah, a young guy wanted to know if cops were searching the dumpsters," and they told him yes, which, of course, this irritated Sousa. However, the man on the other end of the phone was like, quote, "Listen, I didn't know what to do. I don't want to get sued if it turns out you guys don't have the authority or something." Which I absolutely, I'd be the same way. I'd be like, "Bro, I don't give a fuck what case you're working. I'm not about to jeopardize my job, Sousa did end up getting a search warrant, not just for the dumpster, but to search Judy's home. So on October 28th, Sousa, Curtis, Burke, Boudreaux, and criminologist Jack Judy all searched the dumpster, but they found nothing. The next day, October 28th, they searched Judy's house with the help of the LAPD in the form of 10 patrol cars and a helicopter. What the fuck? Can you imagine? Sousa knocked and showed Judy the warrant that gave them permission to search her home. She looked very pale, white, insisted her son was not there, and just continued on with that as the police searched the home. The rest of his siblings were out in the backyard just watching this. Can you imagine? God, I would hate to have my home searched. All your personal belongings and stuff. Ugh, that just, ugh. Sousa told her, quote, "Judy, I'm sorry you're being put through this. I really am. But we're investigating a multiple murder. This isn't a game. As long as Joel won't talk to us, as long as he keeps coming here, he keeps you in the middle of our investigation." But Judy just insisted, quote, "Joel isn't here. I don't know where he is. I've told you that and I've told you that." Sousa said he was pretty sure that she was holding out on them, and she didn't argue this point. Sousa kept trying to convince her, dude, it is really in Joel's best interest if he comes to us, tried to get her to think that they thought his life may be in danger. And then Burke emerged from Joel's bedroom, and he found a letter. It was a receipt from the Wolf's law offices, dated from April, and it showed that the law offices had received a $3,000 retainer from Joel. And instead of confiscating it, they just took a picture of it because they were worried about, attorney-client privilege and all that. Detective Curtis found a locked briefcase. He broke it open, and in it, there was an article about a defense attorney who was notorious for getting, killers off or something. And there was also a bunch of articles about model Claudia Schiffer for some reason in there. Sousa then asked Judy, where would your son get $3,000 from? And she said she didn't know. She knew that he didn't have a job. She had no idea how he was supporting himself. Sousa then asked her if she was aware her son was taking helicopter flying lessons. Judy said no, she wasn't, but she's wasn't that surprised considering one of Joel's brothers was a pilot. They completed their search, and Sousa once again pleaded with her to talk some sense into her son. And with that, they left to their Woodland Hills hotel room to regroup. They did not comment to the press on the search of Judy's house. Sergeant Cottle just told the press, quote, "The Ewell case is still a very active, ongoing investigation, and at this time, we cannot comment on specifics of the investigation." Wolf, Joel's lawyer, commented, and he said, quote, "It seems to me that if they have enough evidence to make an arrest, that's what they ought to do. Otherwise, they ought to leave people alone. They just seem to be trying to stir things up so they can see what happens." Berman also commented on this latest development, and he cited Captain Hoag's letter in his statement. Quote, "The letter screams of the lack of any facts. It was written almost 6 months ago, and it's just a restatement of the fact that they don't have any real suspects. They just know that he may inherit a lot of money, and that makes him a suspect." Joel, of course, found out about the search on his mother's home, and he was at a friend's house when he found out, and according to this friend, Joel was not having it. He was coming apart at the seams a little bit. Quote, "He was acting really nervous. He kept asking if the police used a helicopter and if it had numbers on it or a camera. You could tell it was all coming down on him." Back at the hotel, the criminologist Jack Judy mentioned how they could already prove that Joel and Dana were in some sort of cahoots. But Sousa answered him, quote, "The surveillance on Joel accomplished much of that. Dana pages Joel calls from a phone booth to a phone booth, and financially we're finding Dana's name on Joel's expenses and flight lessons. Shit, Joel was even living at the Ewell home for a while." Judy then commented how asininely stupid that was and why these idiots wouldn't at least avoid each other. At least avoid each other for a time, for a year or two. But Sousa just said, quote, "Let's just hope they don't, or we're dead in the water." Boudreaux then asked about Jack Ponce and how he factored into all this. And Sousa said, quote, "Jack Ponce. I've had a feeling about Ponce. Joel sent that electronic lockpick to Ponce's house, right? So maybe that's just part of the pattern. Maybe Joel's been using Ponce to pick up other things, like a gun. I'm gonna keep squeezing this Ponce kid. One of these bozos has to crack sooner or later." On his way back to Fresno, Sousa did drive by Jack's home, and he saw a white van in the driveway. And he remembered one of the Ewell's neighbors saying that on the night before the murders, they thought they saw a white or light blue van parked outside the Ewell home. And, when he's seeing this van in Jack's driveway, he's like, could this be the van? Back in Fresno, once he got back, Sousa called up Peter and his wife Danielle, purposely calling them when he knew they weren't at home. And he left a message. Quote, "Yes, this is Detective Sousa of the Fresno County Sheriff's Department. Anybody home? Peter? Peter, are you in? I really need to talk to you. Okay, Peter, you remember me. I wish you'd pick up or at least give me a call right back. We have some new information, and I think your brother Joel may be in jeopardy. The point is, we've gotten word from an informant up in Santa Clara area. This guy claims that Dana has put a contract out on Joel. A hit. If this is true, Joel could be in serious danger. Okay, Peter, you have my number. I don't want any harm to come to Joel, and I'm sure you feel the same. So if you see him, try to get him to come in and talk to me, okay? See you, Peter." And this, of course, was all bullshit. It was a lie. Again, he's just trying to rattle some cages, right? Seeing what shakes loose. Now, I don't know when, but I know Danielle did talk to the police. She confirmed Peter's story about Knott's Berry Farm and confirmed the bit about going to her mother's place, but she added a few details. She said that weekend, Joel was supposed to have been at their apartment babysitting their dog Shelby as they went to Knott's. And when asked if Joel was indeed at her home when they returned from Knott's, Danielle just said she couldn't recall. She also stated that on the night of a large earthquake, Peter was not home. Now, this earthquake that she is referring to was a 6.2 magnitude earthquake, and it occurred on April 22nd, 1992. It was a huge, huge earthquake. She said on the night that this earthquake struck at 9:50 p.m., she was home alone. Quote, "I recall when the earthquake happened, I had gone down with my dog to my neighbor's house because I was alone and afraid, and from their phone, I kept paging Peter." She said when her husband finally did get home, she bitched him up and down for not returning her calls, leaving her home alone, and she said that her husband was alone when he came home. Nobody was with him. So all throughout November, Joel continued to evade detectives and not come in, and on November 15th, both Dana and Joel enrolled with Aqua Sports in Fresno, and they enrolled there for scuba diving lessons. They each put down Dana's address as their own on the forms, enrolled in the same classes, did their pool sessions together, and performed their open water dives together, and received their certifications together. On December 2nd, Dana requested that health insurance applications for Joel be sent to his address. When Blue Cross Blue Shield got those forms back, on the forms, which again, they were for Joel, Dana's address was listed as his address, but this address would eventually be changed to an LA P.O. Box address. And on December 8th, Sousa and Curtis decided to surprise Jack as he left his mother's house. Now, Jack was very, very angry at this. He accused him of harassment. And when Sousa was like, well, you know what, just go ahead and file a complaint, Jack just answered, quote, I might just do that. You cops are running roughshod over everybody, even Joel's mother. Searching Judy's house really pissed off Joel. And ignoring that, they then told Jack that, like, hey man, I can't believe you didn't tell us that you subletted your apartment to Joel. And at this point, Jack's speech became, like, very rapid, right? Like, obviously, like, you know, he was caught with his hand in the cookie jar, right? And he really did not expect them to know that information. And, you know, he was extremely, extremely flustered. And he just said, quote, I don't even know if he ever stayed there or not. I can't really remember at this point. They asked if he would take a polygraph in regard to the Ewell homicide case. And Jack said, yeah, absolutely. But he became extremely apprehensive when they were like, all right, cool, let's go down. It should just take a couple hours. Like, let's go right now. And Jack all of a sudden was just like, well, sometime in January would be better for me. And with that, he hurried off to his car and took off as fast as he could, but not before claiming he hadn't seen Peter or Joel since October. The next day, on December 9th, Sousa contacted Harry Masuko. His father owned the hardware store where Dale had got his Browning. If you remember, that's the Browning high-powered 9mm handgun that was missing. And if you remember, Dale bought this gun in 1971 when he had taken over the business and called it Western Piper. Harry told the detective that his father still had all of his old sales records stored in boxes in the garage, and he will go through them and see if he could find anything. 2 days later, Harry phoned up Sousa, and not only had he located the original sales receipt for the Browning, but also for the 2 boxes of the Winchester 9mm ammunition. Meaning, this meant, guys, that the history of the bullets that murdered the Ewell family could be traced all the way back to 1971. And with that, we will end part 3. Yeah, isn't there's just so much. Part 4, you're really gonna love because, like, the noose is gonna be draped over their necks. And it's just oh so juicy. Don't you love when cunts get their comeuppance? Like, it happens so rarely in life that I think that's why this really drew my attention to this case. Just like, wow, some rich prick actually gets, you know, his comeuppance? Wow. Thank you again to Catherine, formerly known as @HeyHeyYou, for suggesting this case. This case is bananas. It's bananas. Like, again, just the audacity. Like, I'll tell you all my thoughts at the very, very end, but, like, my God. Every one of these assholes in this case, like, right, when we cover true crime, a lot of the times, right, the perpetrator ends up having some sort of, like, fucked up background or trauma, abuse, something, right? It doesn't excuse or condone their actions at all, but it helps explain how someone could, like, end up in that position and actually do something horrendous, like take another human's life, right? But, like, with this little cunt, like, all of them, Dana, Joel, and Jack, all these little assholes grew up with silver spoons, and it still wasn't enough for them. Like, I don't know, I hate all of them. I hate them. Oh, man. Yeah, we will be back for part 4 in 2 weeks. And yeah, I think you're really, really going to enjoy part 4. Like I said, Dana and Joel finally get the noose put around their neck, and it is tightening and tightening, and it is oh so joyous to watch and read about. Quick reminder, I did read this book, Catch Me If You Can, by Craig Hanadell, for this case. By the way, can you, like, I cannot stand this cover. Look at that little cunt. Like, don't you just want to, like, oops, I was pointing to the detectives there. I meant Dana. Isn't he like a little cunt? Like, look at that face. Don't you just want to, like, punch it? I want to punch him so bad. Alrighty, guys. Thank you again for putting up for my chaotic schedule. I'm doing some batch recordings, you know, back to back, so that that way I just have to edit and I can hopefully keep to schedule. I will see you back here in 2 weeks for part 4. And until then, take care of yourself, be happy and all that. Remember, don't be a dick. It's one thing to be a dick to dicks, but just don't be an unwarranted dick. Leave a little sparkle wherever you go. Alrighty, guys, I will see you in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.